Great. Thank you so much, Jamila. And it's a true pleasure to host this really esteemed list of panelists that we have today. And I'm sure we're going to have a very exciting discussion. What we'll do is we'll start with a slightly offbeat kind of introduction to each of our speakers. I'll ask them certain non-professional, if I may say so, casual questions. So maybe I'll start with you, Mushtaba. I think you've had a very interesting 2+ decades of career in semiconductor. You started more traditionally as a design engineer in the semiconductor space with Xilinx. And then you moved into Microsoft, which interestingly, not many people know as a key player in semiconductor. And now you're heading Studio Alpha at Microsoft Azure, which is even more interesting. So do you want to just talk about this is interesting career progression and what you have learned and some of your key learnings that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Good to meet you, Siddhant, and welcome everyone else, and thanks for joining. Yeah, it sounds like a little bit of an interview warm-up question, so but I will keep it short, true. So I think the first learning for me is really growing up in the semiconductor industry at Rockwell Semiconductor and then mostly at Xilinx, coming to Microsoft and seeing and interacting with the industry from within the tech ecosystem, realizing how little understanding there is of the semiconductor industry as soon as you get out of the core of the industry. And that was sort of my realization coming into Microsoft. And Microsoft, it's known for software, but there's a lot of hardware projects going on. We've been designing our Xbox silicon for close to 20 years now. There's silicon projects for Kinect and HoloLens, the goggles, and so that's been going on. We've been doing a lot of hardware designs from all the way from server to devices. We have the Surface set of devices, and there's hardware projects in Azure. So there has been a pretty broad-based set of silicon and hardware projects. Even then, the understanding of what separates one architecture from another, or what's really needed to make the ecosystem whole, that understanding is lacking. So I think that's a good reflection for people who are still in the industry trying to position and frame their products to customers. Along with that, I think switching on to you asked for the learning, right? Like for me, the learning has been you really have to get to know and respect the DNA of the company you're in. Right? A lot of times we go into companies or teams and we have ideas and we're like, okay, we can just make this change. But companies are very much like us, right? Like they have a very hardwired DNA. And as we know from ourselves, the hardest thing is to change our habits or behaviors or thinking patterns. It's the same thing for companies. So really understanding the DNA of a company, what drives it, what are its strengths and weaknesses, and then charting a path forward on, okay, what's possible given where you stand. So I would say like, I'll start with those two thoughts.
Perfect, Mushtaba. That's very interesting, and we'll pick on those as we move forward. Srini, I will come to you. You spent almost 2 decades at Qualcomm, and you've done multiple things there. Right? You've worked on compute, you worked on IoT, you even worked on the automotive portion of chip development, and gone ahead and productized more than 30 of these chipsets, right? So it's really interesting what you have accomplished in just 2 decades. What would you see as some of the highlights or the most memorable stints or projects that you have done in Qualcomm?
Yeah, hey, thank you, Siddhant and Janav team for having me. It's very nice to be here, part of this roundtable session, along with these esteemed panel members. Hello, everyone. Siddhant, as you know, right, every silicon development, the bring up or the commercialization, it has own moments, it's excitement and fun. Sometimes the fun could be a little too much to manage to handle. You know what I mean? But if you look back and see, right, and most recently, right, during this pandemic of the last 1.5 years, If you look at all of us, we're all working remotely. We're able to do extremely well on productivity point of view, delivering as well as you imagine, or even sometimes even better. Even if you look at the kids as young as 6 years, remotely learning, remotely connecting, even from the rural areas, they're learning, they're connecting, they continue to do the learning. Not too long ago, right? It would have been difficult to even imagine such scenario. I felt, and I continue to feel, on behalf of the team and the industry, that we are all are part of it. Very motivated for being part of this and enabling this technology that has been helping, that helped everyone, and to continue to manage and continue to learn during this pandemic. Another one, watching the Ingenuity, the NASA's helicopter that made a history of flying on Mars. One of our Snapdragon chipset is part of Ingenuity. I'm sure along with the many other chipsets. Some of our team members were part of the development team developing this chipset. It was a great experience to watch the whole thing to play in front of your eyes, and then working with the team and see the team that the pride in the team for being part of this such a history that's been made. By the way, I told the team, we may not be able to send you to the space, but there's a fair chance that the design you're doing probably will go to the space. So there are many such, but for the recent times, I can correlate and I can connect with these things.
Great, thank you, Srini. That's pretty exciting. Great. So Subhash, I will move to you. Subhash, you have spent what? I think you joined Texas Instruments in 1995, and you have worked across multiple areas. You're currently leading the global hardware R&D as the director, and also looking at basically the connectivity business. And you not only work with the team locally, but you work with teams across US, across Europe, across Asia. So you're doing multiple things and managing teams across different areas. What has been your biggest motivation to continue this high intensity stint for so many years within Texas Instruments?
Sure, Siddhant, I will talk through that. First of all, I want to welcome all the members, all the attendees. I'm looking forward to this session as well. Just to answer your question, Siddhant, in the semiconductor world, everything we do is in a global context. The market is global. No matter which country we take, the semiconductor content is actually becoming more and more impactful in the day-to-day lives of all the people. Customers are distributed globally. The ecosystem is global. The talent is global. So everything we do is in a global context. Now, in that context, we also know that when we bring some of the best minds together, something magical happens. And that happens when, whether it is high-value innovations or whether it is conceptualization of nice products, no matter what we take it, something magical happens. And we start to believe, or we start to realize that the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts when we put the teams together. Now, for me, I think what is interesting is that for this magic to happen, I strongly believe that we need to nourish and we need to really value the diversity of thoughts, diversity of opinions, and diversity of ideas. All of them, when they come together, we start to see a bigger value that's offered. In the global responsibility role, this becomes natural. It provides a platform to bring all the best people together and bring about a higher value. At the end, all of us will agree on this one. There is nothing more fun than winning as a team, and that's really the biggest motivating factor for me.
Great, thank you so much, Subhash. That's very interesting. And I'll come to you, Pradeep. Pradeep, you worked across, unlike some of the other panelists we have, you've actually worked across multiple semiconductor industries, and you've been doing this for almost 3 decades. You had significant stints across Texas Instruments, across, now you're at Marvell, and you were also instrumental in setting up the India Center for Geosemicon. What is it that is keeping you motivated? What are some of the interesting things you want to share about your career, which has kept you going across these multiple stints?
Yeah, thank you, Siddhant. Thank you all. Nice meeting you, fellow panelists as well as esteemed participants. Great question. The key factor of motivation, I think, comes from our common passion about technology and engineering that I think that all of us here that are joining today share. And this passion, amazingly, this passion or this profession, if I may say, right? It's a continuum, whether it is in the Silicon Valley of India, as we call Bangalore, or our other sites when I go to Pune or Hyderabad, or across Noida or other sites like Chennai and so on, and across the globe. And I think when we used to meet at global conferences, I haven't had that chance for 2 years now, but when we go to conferences like DAC or others, I mean, it's just phenomenal to see the common thread that we all share about our passion for technology and making a difference to the world around us, right? A positive impact in a way, right? I guess a few of the learnings that I had in terms of the challenges that we face in our career. There are many, right? As we all experience, there comes challenges from the growth. There comes challenges from meeting customer expectations. There are challenges from execution, team motivation, morale. There's so many challenges that we deal with, and I think what I've learned is that the growth has to be earned through self-development. If you are committed to yourself and to your peers and the organization, the growth comes your way automatically, right? Support of peers, support of one's manager. In my career, I've learned that my manager is my best champion, and meeting and beating the expectation is a surefire way to succeed, no matter what the challenge is. Because what you really need in a moment of challenge, whether chip is having difficulty coming up and you are in the intense debugging, you are very close to the tape out, and there is intense pressure with last minute surprises that show up, right? Burnouts of the team as you work from home for long hours, right? You really need all the tools at your disposal to make forward progress, and that's where your own manager becomes your champion and supports you to succeed, right? So this is one thing. There's just one experience that particularly that I think it might take some of us back to our early days in the career, and I'm not able to resist to share. So I'll just take a couple of more minutes. But in my very first job, I started my career with Hughes, with a PhD, with a chip on the shoulder, walking into a company, and I was given a task to design the first smart card interface. We were building a set-top box product for the DirecTV, and there was an ISO 7816, which still comes in my nightmares at times, that I had to design the interface to, and we designed the interface, got it done. Prototype was working. We did a tape out. Chip came back. Millions of smart set-top boxes got deployed worldwide. And then 2 years later, the News Datacom, that was a smart card vendor, introduced a new version of the card with a better security. And they changed the clock frequency. And guess what? None of the set-top boxes would work with a new card. And that's when it dawned on me that there is a lot more to making a product successful than knowing the theory, right? And that was a spotlight for 2 months. 2 years into the career, not the kind of spotlight you want from the president of the company. There's every day meeting with a customer. What do we do with all these set-top boxes that are out in the field? Would we end up doing a recall, right? What is the issue? And then, of course, it turned out to be, asynchronous design. I had not done the correct design to handle a different clock frequency than what I had designed to, right? And News Datacom up the frequency to secure certain features, and it broke my design. And enormous number of hours to figure out a workaround, which finally worked, and we could save the respin. We could avoid a recall, right? And it was a very humbling experience that everything that we know, there is still more to learn. And I think one thing we cannot compromise in our industry is attention to detail, right? And 3 decades later, asynchronous design is still as much of a challenge. With all the expansions that we have seen in the EDA industry, it really comes down to engineer being very meticulous, thinking of every scenario to handle asynchronous design, right? And that has still remained true. Well, I kind of graduated from that learning and went on to produced 3 silicons that were first pass success. I got President's Award. But I can't thank anybody more than my own manager, who really held me through the whole experience very patiently. Right, there were discussions of financial damages, lawsuit, all sorts of things. Right, and for a manager to really hold a fresh graduate through their entire experience, guide him, mentor him, support. I mean, I really think that ultimately what keeps me smiling is my boss, and my holding a passion for this profession relentlessly. So I thought this might be something that might bring us back early years of our career to the memory.
Yeah, no, Pradeep, that's a very, very interesting and riveting war story that you shared with us. And also, I must note, I guess you have been extraordinarily and I would say lucky to have good managers across different companies, right? And not just 1 or 2 of them. So it's excellent and good. Maybe the semiconductor industry is that way. So hopefully, yeah, I think that's really good insights, Pradeep. Yeah, look forward to having more of these kind of insights from you as we go forward. Nirav, I will come to you, right? So you also spent about 25 years overall in the semiconductor industry. You've also been with Harman for about a decade now. And interestingly, you're not only focusing on design, but also some of the use cases of the semiconductor industry into higher technology areas such as AR, VR, such as transformation, voice assistants, IoT devices. You're looking at multiple things. So what do you think is one of the exciting highlights of your career, and what keeps you going?
First of all, thank you, Siddhant, for inviting me, and I'm very, very happy to see great panel along with me today, and also welcome to the participants. So very interesting question, Siddhant, I must say, right? So definitely thought-provoking, takes me down the memory lane, because as you said, I'm in the industry for a while, but and I've seen multiple transformations happening, and that's what keeps me excited most of the time. But today we live in a very fast-paced world, right? With real-time immersive experiences for our life, with everything we do, be it at work, be it at home, or be it anywhere in between, right? So technology is enhancing and augmenting all our experiences. So and that is predominantly driven by silicon, right? Silicon has a major role into it. Technologies, which some of the ones which you mentioned, and others like ADAS or IoT or 5G, they are all able to change the life of people, and they're all powered by silicon ecosystem. So as I'm sure most of you know, some of the industry experts have already started calling silicon as oil of new generation or our generation, right? And that's what tells you about how much transformation silicon is providing to overall life of people, right? So as an example, one of the SoC which my team developed, and similar to what Pradeep and Srini were talking about as well, went first pass. We were lucky enough, we didn't have the problem which Pradeep was explaining. I have my own stories on that side as well, but this one is already into millions of TVs in everyone's home, and we can relate with it. My team can relate with it, and we are all very proud of what we are doing to get the engagement which we are able to generate in life of people, right? So I would say that while I have enjoyed my time in the industry and have seen multiple transformations, current era which we see life at the center of everything and silicon being key player to it is definitely at the top. So that's the way I would put it, Siddhant.
Excellent. I think I was just doing some maths. We have more than 118 years of experience among the 5 of you panelists. So I think we're going to have some really exciting things. But I think what Nirav said is very pertinent to this discussion. We are almost at the most exciting stage of semiconductor, despite each of you, spending about 2-3 decades in this. I don't think semiconductor has had a higher point than where we are today. And maybe I'll start my first question in that space itself. Now, all of this, exciting areas that semiconductor is able to bring and get differentiation for every vertical and every company, what we are witnessing is, semiconductor is actually becoming what in 10 years back people said, software is eating the world. We now see that ASIC is almost at that level. You refer to it as the new oil, and that is true. And what we are seeing is this huge growth in demand, leading to multiple different side effects. So I just want to start with that. And Pradeep, I will come to you. What do you think are the key drivers for this demand? As a layperson, all we see is more and more smartphones, but is it more than that? What is it that's actually driving this significant demand in the market?
Sure. So great question, Siddhant. We have heard that necessity is the mother of all inventions, but I like to extend and say that necessity is also mother of all demand creation in the market. So if there is a solution that actually addresses a real pain point at an affordable price point, the demand just comes about, right? And that's a market dynamics, right? So, but what drives the technology to meet the demand is the innovation of a particular technology, but that is just a starting point. What you really when to develop a solution, what you really need to see happen is a convergence of multiple areas of technologies to drive a solution. And then when you have a complete solution, right, that is when the need is addressed, and when the need is addressed, the consumers or the respond with a like for the technology or for the need for the technology, right? So I'll just cover one offbeat example, and then I'll go into what is more relevant for today's technology demand. I think many of us may know that the parabolic lenses were invented in 1906, right? And this is also being referred to nowadays as a fisheye lens, right? But up until recently, until a decade ago, there was no real application for the technology, right? Until the video analytics came around, until the dewarping technology and algorithms were invented, the parabolic lenses were just that. But today, if you look at automotive segment, if you look at defense segment, there is with the drone applications, automotive applications, there's a huge market, and that has happened because there is a convergence of technology. We do have a lens, we do have video analytics, algorithms, software platforms, right? What is driving today's demand, right, is basically that we are at a point of inflection with a convergence of 4 areas of innovation: mobility, connectivity, cameras, and computers. All of 4 areas of this technology have actually matured and converged in a solution, which is basically being referred to data on the go, right? Anywhere, anytime, anyhow. And this was also, till 2 years ago, this was still a convenience, right? In the COVID world, data on the go has actually become a necessity. Working from home, working from remote offices, right? The workplace that was 2 years ago, or the normal that was 2 years ago, is never going to be there. And if you look at the amount of acceleration the innovation has had, many applications like Zoom that we are on today, right? They've been around. They were not as heavily used as they're being used today, right? So necessity, I think the COVID-19, while a very tough situation worldwide, it has done 2 good things, in my opinion. It has brought humanity together as one, irrespective of any identity tag, right? That is on the social aspect, right? To fight the COVID-19. But the other good thing it has done is it has really given a tremendous acceleration to the demand of data on the go. So the product lines like data center, enterprise, right, and carrier, particularly with 5G technology, right? There has been just tremendous demand that has generated, and this is not going to go away, because what was a convenience before, now it is a necessity. And we are going to be stepping into post-COVID world that is going to look so different than the pre-COVID world, where many of these things that we have gotten comfortable using, they're going to become part of our daily life, right? And that's what is driving the demand, if you ask me, in these 3 particular segments as of today.
Perfect. Srini, I will come to your perspective on almost the same question. What do you think is driving the demand?
Yeah, Siddhant, thank you. Thanks for the question. Indeed, it is a significant growth in demand, and it's a good time to be part of a semiconductor industry for sure. I would say the fundamental factors for this drive is the demand growth is one is the advancement of technology, as Pradeep mentioned, either in AI, ML, or AR, XR kind of areas. And then the connectivity, the other important part of it. The connectivity is enabling these technologies to proliferate in areas where we did not see earlier, right? Then on top of this, the ability to integrate the system integration and manufacturing capabilities with advanced tech nodes, able to miniaturization, and able to get these mobile devices that can last longer than a day or so is continue to help the demand. Connectivity, I believe, is one of, if not the key driver. With the connectivity, the possibilities are unlimited, right? What you have with the connectivity is you can download a movie faster, you can stream the video, or you can do online gaming and social media and et cetera. As an example, right? Say a decade ago, you were going on a vacation with your family. Probably you would carry your laptop and a camera, video recording, and extra storage device because the videos to kind of store extra. Otherwise, the camera gets filled or video recorder goes away, and you have a GPS and so on and so forth. Now, if you are going today on a vacation, you carry all this stuff in your hand. It's as a smartphone. And then the smartphone, that ability to get all this stuff in one device, and the demand of this increasing the technology advancements also. So with the connectivity, you don't have to worry about storage. You don't have to worry about connectivity. You don't have to worry about where you are lost or whatever. You can stream and you can do connect everything, anything in the world virtually. You can be wherever you want. So the increase in demand also drives the technology. It's kind of an engine that drives, right? The advancement technology to increase the demand increases the technology. I remember a decade or so ago when we were doing 3G modem. We were planning to this 7.2 megabits per second downlink modem, and people were talking about what are we going to do with that much of data rates? How are we going to do with it? What are we going to do? Why do we need this much? Now, today, if you look at the 5G, we have 10 gigabits per second downlink and multi-gigabits uplink, and we still want it to be faster, low latency, more reliable, more secure connectivity. I think that's what I say, this engine that goes like a wheel, that goes advancement technology, improves the demand, and the demand increases advancement of the technology. So that's what I see.
Very, very interesting, Srini. And in fact, you made almost the perfect the perfect segue into my next question. And everybody knows that semiconductor industry has almost the highest R&D intensity, with up to about 30% of revenues being invested back. And you're almost always at the leading edge or the bleeding edge of technology. And coming to the recent times, and I would maybe start with Mujtaba. Mujtaba, what do you think, or where do you think are some of the key trends from the design part of the chipsets? What are some of the new things that you are seeing?
Yeah, I think several of my colleagues have mentioned the applications or scenarios that have been driving the demand, right? And having first sit inside the semi industry and now from a Microsoft lens, where I see inflection points is, yes, that drives the design. So for example, edge devices, cloud devices, secure 5G, autonomous driving. I think we all know the trends that are pushing the designs. But these inflection points also force a change in thinking on how the system is stacked together. And oftentimes the prior way of assembling, that's the silicon, firmware, software, OS, applications, no longer is the right fit. Mm-hmm. And through those inflection points is where sort of new design, sometimes you see, vertical integration, people outside the industry wanting to kind of do more design so they can pack it better together. The smartphone era drive that. Now, if I look at it from a Microsoft standpoint, I sit in Azure, right? Like we're still building cloud mostly using server era parts, right? Like the cloud should be designed using a whole new type of architecture stack, all the way from chips through the hardware, racks, spines, data center, and connectivity. And the cloud vendors are starting to really push on that. As you push on that, you realize, hey, you know what? What do I need to change throughout the whole stack? And how do I partner appropriately with the industry to get those designs to happen? So I think those every time a substantial new scenario comes up and we realize that the building blocks were not really optimized for this scenario, that pushes change.
Interesting. Maybe going back to what Pradeep shared of his initial story, right? Multiple things have to work together. Each design has to be married to some of the other components. And you kind of touched upon that from a full stack perspective, especially as an end consumer in the new cloud era. I think that's a very interesting perspective, Mujtaba. Subhash, coming to you from Texas Instruments perspective, obviously they have been one of the leaders, right? So what are some of the key trends you are seeing more recently?
Sure, Siddhant. I think many of the panel members talked about overall what's driving the growth and things like that. Srini talked about connectivity in the cell phone context. But really, if you look at it at a very high level, the data is becoming the center of everything that we do. And when we talk about data and a useful means of using it, then the connectivity comes into play. The reason we walk in, like Srini said, we will carry a phone with us today compared to many devices is because the phone is now capable of processing and dealing with the data in a lot more efficient than how it was before. That's one aspect of connectivity. There are many other aspects of it that are actually becoming the way of life, the way we learn, the way we work, the way we have fun, the way we secure our safety, the way we secure our security. All the pieces of it require some level of dealing with data and connecting the data together. We can talk about things like building automation, factory automation, and things like that. There are sensors everywhere. Data, communicating between the machines or to the central unit, and then making certain decisions. And I think all of it becomes fundamental. And this is connectivity. That's what we loosely refer as IoT, right? Internet of Things. But not more than the internet, it is about the different connectivity protocols that bind all the systems together to make our lives better or more fun, whatever the way it is. And it's true with the cars too. If we take automotive things and if we talk about advanced drive systems, there are so many sensors around the car today, radar to video, the cameras to whatnot. You want to just name any kind of a sensor, tire pressure monitoring to all of it. Everything gets connected back and it processes certain information and gives it. So the connectivity in general is a trend that continues to drive our growth because the data being center of it is best handled when there is good connectivity. In some applications, it may be an ultra low power. Your battery has to last for long. And in some cases, it may be the very high throughput. You may want to be gaming. You're in the car and you want to really be playing a game or you want to be streaming. That's a different kind of thing. But at a very macro level, we are really talking about connectivity as one of the big drivers. Now, the other piece of it that what we're trying to do in general is that we are trying to make machines more intelligent, right? Our desire, if you look back in history, the machines were trying to do things that we can't do efficiently. We can't run faster, so we have cars and vehicles that can run faster. The machines can do it at precision, and we get tired. They don't want to get tired. But that era is continuing. But what is really accelerating is building more intelligent systems. We want to think like human. That's what we are trying to do. And that's where you talk about AI, machine learning, whatever we call it. But effectively, we are trying to make machines more intelligent and start to replace some of the thinking that we do in that. And it has got its own advantages. And that's another trend. And if I were to give a very simple example, just think of driving in a highway and you see a little ahead of the road, there is a playground and the kids are playing. And there is a ball that gets kicked and that crosses the road and you're watching it. And there is a context there. Kids are playing and the ball is crossing the road. And as a human, I can understand that there is a high likelihood a kid may cross the road. Stop it, right? But the same context, the same ball is crossing. Just add one more context to it. Both sides of the road, there is a playground. One side, there is a soccer ground and the other side is a cricket ground. Now, you see the football getting tossed in the same direction, but actually it is not going from the football ground. It is actually coming back from the cricket ground back to the football ground. Now you suddenly start to think that, okay, the ball has crossed somewhere earlier. This is not something that you have seen. We have not seen any of this. But given the context, we start to think that the ball has already crossed to the cricket. Somebody is throwing it back. Now nobody is going to cross. I'm not going to break it. What we see is this exact same context, but there are certain things that are around us that make us see things that we don't see. How do we make machines see it? We need to make machines learn it. And that's where the difficulty comes in. So there is a trend on how do we make machines, whether it is neural network, whatever it is, how do we make machines more intelligent? So between these two, connectivity and machines, these are not two independent things, because a good connectivity is needed to gather a lot of information for the machines to be intelligent as well. Because as humans, we sense a lot of things. We see, we hear, and we have a context and all of it, and binding it together. So I would say, from an overall trend perspective, a combination of connectivity and making the machines more intelligent is what is going to drive, at least in the foreseeable future.
Excellent, Subhash. I think you've explained a very complex topic in a very simple manner. I really liked how you did that. And also, I think you touched upon how, the automotive industry is one of the big consumers. And I know many folks who are not part of the industry or don't have that much, what you said, context, were very surprised as to why automotive companies are reducing their manufacturing because of semiconductor shortages. So I think, we are seeing, the deep, penetration of semiconductor into every portion of our lives. So excellent. Thank you for sharing that perspective, Subhash. Nirav, I will come to you. And you've been part of, you worked not just with one or two companies, right? You work with a plethora of companies across different verticals. You're privy to all the different complexities that they're trying to solve with semiconductor. From your perspective of, actually having a vantage point in the industry, where do you see the biggest trends, the biggest design areas coming up?
Definitely, Siddhant. And as you rightly said, my perspective is slightly different than what Subhash and Mujtaba were explaining. They were more looking at it from the silicon manufacturer or silicon development side. I'm looking at it from the services aspect of it, and I get to see the actual trends on what it means when it comes to the ground, right? So, for example, we keep talking a lot about advanced technology nodes. So 4 nanometer, 5 nanometer is something which my team worked in this year, but already we are significant R&D money is going into 2 nanometer and 3 nanometer, right? So that's a significant aspect. I think it is getting to the limits of it, and that's where the other trends are also coming up, where it's not possible, practically not possible, to get more out of going further down in the stream. The cost of it is increasing significantly, right? So that's one of the trend which is still there. We are already at 3 nanometer. 2 nanometer is also being discussed, even though I say that it's costlier. So hopefully we will solve that puzzle. The second thing which I keep seeing is related to the first one, which I said. Now, as it is not practically possible to go further down on the size wise, advancements in packaging and the technologies around it are very much being discussed and are very much driving some of the decisions from the solutioning perspective, right? So how do we ensure that we are able to still have powerful systems, which all the other panelists spoke about, without going further, because Moore's law is more or less becoming impractical as we go further in the cycle, right? So how do we have heterogeneous integration? How do we have advanced packaging technologies which provide viable alternative instead of just having a smaller footprint, right? So that's something which we see in almost all the conversations on how do we get more from the existing technologies which we have. The third thing which we have been seeing recently is obviously what Gajendra also mentioned in his keynote, is regarding the AI-based chip design. It is definitely being used significantly in the industry right now, and it is showing the results. Things which were ideally taking months is now taking weeks, at least for 80% of the cases. There are still those 20% corner cases where you need to give enough time, as explained with the couple of use cases earlier, right? But the 80% where otherwise was requiring months, reducing to weeks itself is a great achievement. So that's something which is doing well and then is scaling further as we progress. And the last bit which I would touch upon is adoption of risk-free. That has completely changed the game, right? So it is no more new kid on the block. It's well established. There's a very good ecosystem. The custom processor design with RISC-V has become a lot cheaper, faster, reliable, and obviously less riskier from the perspective of the silicon OEM, right? So it is well-established standard now, and like any other open standards, it's supported by global community. So what it means is it's no one's entity. It's not dependent on person or geography, which actually is a big issue in current geopolitical situation as well. So those are the 4 key trends from the micro perspective, as I would like to call it, which we see on the ground in our interactions with our customers.
Excellent, Nirav. Thank you for that. I will just, I know the panel has touched upon it a little bit, but I want to just spend some more time. Pradeep said the necessity is the mother of all demand. And then Srini almost alluded to the opposite, right? That better technology gets you better use cases, and better use cases drive additional demand. So it's almost cyclical. So I want to touch upon that point, and maybe I'll come to you, Srini. What are some of these new use cases that you are seeing, use cases that have been enabled by semiconductor technology and things that are actually driving more and more demand? So if you could just spend some time on that, Srini, that will be great. You might want to unmute yourself, Srini.
Okay, that was a good one. Thank you. Thanks, Siddhant. Thanks for the question. So you said, what are the new technologies? Sorry, come again, that question, please. Sorry,
I was saying, what are the new use cases and technologies across industries that are catalyzing this growth? So any use cases you want to talk about?
Yeah, certainly. So as Subhash alluded, right, that the point is, once you have the ability to connect, and the data gathering and intelligence, adding the intelligence is what is going to add more new technologies, new innovations come into picture. If you look at everything that standalone we had before, they had their own standalone use cases, right? If you consider a robot or whatever it is, it has its own standalone use cases. They are doing their own operations in a limited space, a limited way. But once you connect that device to the network, and to the rest of the devices around it, now the opportunities and the use cases are unlimited. You can take an example of having a farm connected with the Bluetooth, meshed Bluetooth networks, and making an advanced technology that can enable us to conserve the water and to grow the crop in a way that is much more efficient, and utilization is much better. So the data part connecting and then the intelligence gathering is what helping it out. But now with this kind of data management, it's not easy to put on part of the device, right? If you put in local to the device, crunching the data and making intelligent decisions, and if you can make that into a cloud and open it up, and you gather data around the entire thing, then the improvements are significant. The efficiency and utilizations are significant. An example, right? You heard about this, the milk of the cows, cow milk, then using a Bluetooth technology, how these guys are, the farmers in a villages, able to improve the overall milk production. The way this is connected, if a standalone, a farmer living in his own farmland, doing a few cows and then doing the milk production, but he or she may not know what's happening a kilometer away or a mile away where the other farm is having, what diseases the cows are having, how it is connected. Now imagine if these are all connected through a network, and somewhere maybe in an office outside, the government able to have visibility of this farm has a cow, so suddenly the milk production reduced. There may be something wrong, that disease could spread into other areas, and they can come and do corrective actions, right? So the efficiency and the improvement utilization is going to be significant. The same thing can be applicable in many, many areas where you see a lot more use cases come once you have the data gathering capability and training and intelligence can be made.
Interesting, Srini. So I think what you're referring to is just the permeation of this technology more and more into not just techies, but actual use cases with common and lay people. I think that's a very interesting point you mentioned. Pradeep, I'll come to you with the same question, right? What are you seeing as some of the key use cases that are catalyzing this growth in semiconductor?
Certainly. So I think there are two driving factors in the use cases, right? There is a top-down, which is driven more from the corporate, where they have the strategic roadmap, they have the view of what world is going to look like 10 years down the road, and they're preparing ahead to be the market leaders, right? So there is the top-down view of the the newer areas of innovation and use cases, and then there is a bottom-up approach, which is there are a lot of innovators around the world that are really leveraging the flexibility that the new infrastructure, which is data on the go, right? Connecting anytime, anywhere, anyhow. A lot of interesting use cases are coming up, and this is like a revolution in the semiconductor industry that we saw in the area of the software when the apps revolution came up, where every student in a premier college was developing an app, and that had a use case, right? So I'll cover the top-down approach where autonomous vehicle is highly talked about, and that's a very interesting use case coming up where vehicles will drive on their own, and there will not be a driver. That's more of a what you call as a business-driven outcome, right? Requires tons of investment, risk, everything that goes with it. And when it comes to bottom-up innovation or the use cases, we recently had hosted the innovators on the ground, where we just invited students, individual entrepreneurs, whoever has something unique that they've developed and have a proof of concept. And just as Srini alluded to, we came across this student from I think University in Jodhpur. He had innovated an IoT device that will detect the density of the mosquito, and it had as long as there is a connectivity to the device, you could spread the device all across the city, and every end of the day, usually when the mosquitoes are out in the evening, it will record based on the flipping of the wingspan that creates a certain particular frequency. They will share the data with the municipality about where is the mosquito density. So when it comes to the preventive measures, you don't have to go and take measures across the whole city. There may be hotspots, right? So this is where I think now we are coming into a very convergent world where there are many areas of technology verticals that are converging, and there are many intelligent minds that are either part of the business-driven innovation that is more strategic, and there are many entrepreneurs that are now part of the college incubation, university programs, self-driven, self-funded, right? I think there is an opportunity for every kind of innovator out there, particularly with the convergence of the technology and the availability of the data on the go. And this is the kind of two ends that I kind of think that when it comes to app or application scenario, right? Infrastructure is all there. What problem do you want to focus on solving? If you're a corporate, you look for huge revenues and large market segment for leadership. If you're an individual entrepreneur, you could just look around where there are applications, and you will find many. Right.
Excellent. Great. I think it's very interesting. I think both of you spoke about some really ground level rustic examples of how penetration is increasing, accessibility is increasing, and that's also in a way driving demand per se, right? Very interesting. Nirav, I just have to come to you for this question because you have this broad perspective. So quick take from you as well on the top use cases.
Absolutely. So here also I will give you a view which I am getting from the ground, right? So 5G definitely, and Srini and Pradeep both spoke about it, is driving a lot of this, right? So 5G related applications and 5G proliferation across segments. There's infinite use cases which are coming up both from top down side or bottom up side, as Srini Pradeep was explaining. Is coming up, right? So we see a lot more traction which 5G is generating, right from the network to devices to the actual functional use cases. We see that being a demand driver for us. Automotive, again, I completely agree. Both ADAS and fully autonomous vehicles are something which is significantly being invested in, and we see a lot of demand coming from that area. IoT, smart city has been traditionally growing, and I do see that continuing going forward as well. Followed by customized silicon, which Mustafa was talking about as well, which is something which is picking up. It's not as high as the other I spoke about. Consumer experience driven products due to COVID, as you know, has really become important. You name the consumer equipment device, it seems everything is now going to get into a price war very soon. We have been surviving till now, but next year is going to be very difficult, and we will see a lot more stress in the system in this area as well. And the last, which some of you might be interested in, whoever is in Bitcoin, the enterprise cloud and mining related activities, which have increased so much in recent past, are also driving next generation chipsets and solutions. So these are the key use cases which we see as part of our interactions with our customers as and when we discuss about it. Technologies, I think we spoke already about it, so I'll not repeat that.
Excellent, Nirav. I think that was really good how you gave a perspective across different areas. Now I must address this question, right? And it's almost the what we have gathered here for. All this demand is leading to maybe a temporary, maybe a medium-term kind of shortage in the actual chipsets that is available to the industry. And I'm sure the chip manufacturers are really trying hard to solve this. I just wanted, maybe I'll come to Subhash first. So Subhash, what is your take on how are companies like yourself coping up with this kind of chip shortage? Is there anything that you are doing to kind of address this?
Sure, Siddhant. I think, maybe I'll start with saying that if you were to look at 15 to 18 months ago, there were two sentiments, right? One, if you were to look at it, there is the market demand aspect of it. Will it continue to grow? And the expectation was that it would. And the second aspect was that there is a pandemic that is becoming more serious. And the impact of that pandemic on the market and the growth was an unknown. And I think it's fair to say that the extent of demand growth that we saw during this pandemic took the industry by a surprise. Some people would have predicted the growth would come. Some people would have predicted that the growth would be a little less than what we would anticipate. But the extent of growth, it has really taken us by a surprise. Now, it's a good problem to have, by the way. I think it's much better than not having a demand for us to go and find a solution. With that, I think the companies are, looking at it in different ways, and I can talk about a few things that we look at it as well. There is a slightly different context when we look at companies with internal manufacturing footprint versus not having that internal manufacturing footprint, because you have a different level of flexibility to deal with it. And the first thing, irrespective of whether you have internal or external, the factories are trying to run with full utilization. Earlier, if they were running with a 90% utilization, they want to be running at 100% utilization, all three shifts or whatever it is, whatever it takes. They don't want to waste a single thing because they can make good use of it, right? That's the first step. And it's a natural thing. And different companies have different inventory practices. And of course, that is another big piece of how do you manage your inventory. And I'm not talking about the inventory of the finished goods. Inventory of finished goods is one thing that we will always try to deplete when the demand comes in. But there is also another aspect of it. Inventory is held at different places, right? You may have a wafer level inventory. You may have something before your assembly, and you may have it at a final goods. And the case is some of the things that are very relevant to us in the TI world is also that, and I'm sure it will be applicable for many other companies, is that in some cases, we will have a similar same silicon die that will probably go into a different packages, maybe in some case 200 pins and maybe a 350 pins or whatever it is, having different capabilities. Now, the inventory that we hold before the assembly is an option that we can trigger and funnel it into the place where there is a bigger demand and take advantage. That's one thing that we all do it. So there is an intelligent inventory management that comes into play. And if there is an inventory at a wafer level, there is even more flexibility than you can actually build what you want, depending on the place where you see the highest demand. So one, of course, the factory utilization. How do we drive it up? Second, how do we intelligently manage your inventories that come in? And there is a third aspect of it, which is also interesting. Sometimes when we all have products. And sometimes we have two different variants of a product. One is much more capable at a premium price, and the other one is not as premium because it has to cater to a cost-efficient market. When you're stuck in a supply-demand problem, and if you had some flexibility about the premium parts, then you can start offering that as an alternate solution. And some customers will pick it. And if I were to give a very crude analogy, let's put ourselves into as a vendor who give, let's say, shoes for the school kids, and we supply it and we buy it and supply it. Suddenly, the demand becomes so high that we are not getting supplies. What do? We have two options. One, we can say that, okay, only we have 50% supply and that's it. Or we can say, look, there is a branded one that's available that looks exactly like this. Okay, you can use it, but it is at a premium. And you offer that solution, and it is for customers to pick it. And we have seen that most of the customers are willing to, when you're stuck, when you don't have it, willing to pay a premium. So you could actually effectively use some of the premium parts if you have some excess inventory. It will effectively cater to the areas where where we have the highest demand. That's another piece. And the last piece is that we also want to solve the problem for future. What if this demand continues for another 6 months? What if the demand continues for 9 months? And that's where I think it starts to building more capacity comes in. And I can give an example. I think many of you would have seen TI bought another fab a few months ago. And that was exactly for this reason. It may not solve the problem in the next 3 months, but it will definitely make our position a lot better from a demand perspective, so we can go and address it. And it's not just buying, we're also building capacity internally to make it bigger. So different companies may have different strategies depending on what the capabilities they have internally. But I would say broadly, every factory is trying to increase their utilization. Everybody is trying to become more intelligent in the inventory management piece of it. They're trying to become creative in repurposing the parts to different places. And then fourth, trying to set things up better for a better future by building more capacity.
Excellent, Subhash. I think you gave some very pragmatic insights into how companies are trying to manage at a very core tactical level as well. Really appreciate that insight, Subhash. And it's good to see that everyone is working hard to ensure things are flowing well. Srini, I'll come to you specifically, right? And Subhash mentioned a lot around supply chain. Any quick thoughts that you have around how, if increased efficiency in supply chain can try and solve some of this supply chain issues?
Yes, certainly, right. Certainly, Siddhant. If you look at, as Subhash said, right, 1.5 years ago when the pandemic started, many of us thought that the demand will slow down, and that was the assumption we made a quarter or so. But within 2 quarters, we realized exactly the opposite happening. The demand continue to grow and exponentially. But whatever we were assuming and then reducing the inventory or whatever the flow supply chain that we lost in the first 1 to 2 quarters is not going to come back. That's lost a supply. So we need you to accelerate in the subsequent, the last 1 year, 5 quarters or so, and also continue to see how to match the demand, the supply to the demand. There are 2 aspects of it. One is certainly to increase the capacity. And as Subhash said, all the factories, all the industries are running at the full capacity, and they're trying to get even more. How do I optimize it further? How do I mitigate it to reduce the number of steps we do to improve the throughput, improve the capacity for short duration, to taking a risk, some level of it, to get the better capacity, right? But also the other aspect of it is you don't want the pendulum to swing the other direction. So I think we need to be very careful about how we kind of predict the supply chain. How do you predict the amount of demand coming in? How do we ensure the natural tendency of when there's a certain demand, people started saying that, okay, I wanted X number of, so in case I want extra 10%. Every customer started saying that I want extra 10%. Generally there's artificial demand is being made, right? And we saw that in the initial time of the pandemic, the governments were telling us, hey, don't go and hog the groceries and buy groceries for a month long, right? There will be supplies, don't worry. So the tendency will come, right? So we need to be very careful. Certainly there are some new techniques, new methodologies we can apply. And also in these complex systems, the supply chain, the chain lengths are not uniform. For certain components, the chain length is longer. It takes time to build it. Some for shorter. So the configurations, as Subhash said, there's a premium tier, there's a little bit of a low tier stuff that you have to configure the chains and the length and how long it takes to get this system to be there. So you need to plan this stuff, and you need to be a sophisticated system of managing the supply chain, the overall thinking to make sure One is you don't have excessive inventory at some time and you get into the trouble spot, or you don't have under inventory. I think it's a very complex problem. Each company is doing it their own way. We are doing some of the techniques what Subhash alluded, and we're trying to manage it. And hopefully we see this the end of this challenges in the next few months, and hopefully things will get better and continue to go the demand and we're able to supply.
Excellent, excellent. And Nirav, your quick take. I mean, anything you've seen, user community try and do better to cope with this?
No, so completely echo what Subhash and Srini were explaining on what OEMs are trying to do from the digital transformation services company perspective, which what we are seeing, barring the geopolitical issues, obviously, is that improve efficiency, which Srini just alluded to. Shift left strategy, while it is must, but I think the prioritization which I see is a lot more in the current scenario. Everyone wants to see how to reduce the cycle time or turnaround time for the new products which they want to launch in market. Blockchain definitely is being evaluated and is already being used in some of the companies to streamline their complete supply chain. Considering various businesses in various countries get involved in delivering a solution. Predictive analytics is definitely another thing which is, along with AI, is helping in doing better failure analysis compared to what it used to. And I see that being going further as time progresses. And obviously, next generation tools and technologies, both for development and manufacturing, is another key which is being used by all the silicon providers to improve their supply issues. So those are the trends which I see when I interact with our clients.
Excellent, excellent, Nirav. So Mushtaba, we've not heard you for a while. I was actually saving you for one very interesting area of the panel discussion today. One of the big things that we have witnessed, especially in the last few years, and it's an increasing trend going forward, is end customers such as yourself and across different verticals are actually building their own in-house silicon. Not just design but even manufacturing, and to an extent, you alluded to it, right? To have better control on the overall system. Is it easier said than done? And what are some of the key challenges? And what is the biggest motivation to actually do something that is actually not that straightforward and kind of own it and overcome all those challenges? So your perspective on that, Mushtaba.
Yeah, and my perspective on that is that this is not new, right? I mean, this aspect of a deeply vertically integrated product stack that then becomes a horizontal component, then integrates again, that cycle happens. If you look at our industry, right, like it was the IBM supercomputer where we started, which was, everything was done soup to nuts by IBM. Then, that shifted. And you had the processor, the OS, the app layer, etc. Then with the smartphones, you got some level of vertical integration again. So that cycle shifts and happens, right? Like you got to look at every time there's a push to go from the horizontal model to a vertically integrated one. What's driving that, right? And I mentioned that earlier in the call, right? Like there's some kind of, I think the opportunity to extract more margin, that is usually a short-term impact, right? Like the real thing is being able to achieve something or deliver an experience that was not possible before, right? Like for the smartphones, when it came about, the level of integration needed could not have been achieved using off-the-shelf parts at that time. And so then a vendor entity has to make a decision on, do I wait for the industry to get there, or do I have the wherewithal to just do it myself, right? And some people chose to do that. Cloud is now driving some of that same dynamic. I think many of the trends mentioned here. So cloud, but really that's big data, right? Like there was a lot of talk around ADAS and self-driving cars and autonomy. It's all requires humongous amounts of data processing and big data pipelines. What's the optimal infrastructure needed to accomplish that? Can you do that using off-the-shelf parts? And if you can't, should you wait? Or should you go do something on your own? I think that's a very active discussion that vendors need to have as we're going through the change. From a Microsoft standpoint, we've been, throughout the time I've been here and even before, very much been an ecosystem and partnership focused strategy is how we've approached it. Srini is here, like we've got a deep partnership with Qualcomm, with Intel. I've been part of deep discussions on, 10 years ago when, smartphones were starting to get integrated, how should Microsoft respond? You see it in our Surface line. It's built of all off-the-shelf parts for the semi industry. So our approach has been to really partner with the semiconductor industry by providing very deep requirements and roadmaps on what's needed, and reserve that lever of doing something ourselves only if absolutely needed. And that's been exercised in very few places. For example, for HoloLens, because it's so far out and the technology doesn't exist, we've been doing some chip development there.
Interesting, Mustafa. Your perspective on saying that you're doing only if necessary. Pradeep, I wanted to get your quick take on that. Right? Is it always this harmonious, if I would say so, or are we really seeing a lot of interest and investment from end customers? And if so, how is the semiconductor industry reacting to it? Are you also saying that, hey, even for low volumes, we will give you a better design? Is there something that the semicon industry is looking at this very seriously, or is it just cyclical? Is it actually just harmonious?
Yeah, no, I think what Mujtaba said, I completely agree with him that, ultimately this sort of trends are driven by the differentiation that the companies feel that they can offer to the customer, right? There are three key areas in the silicon industry. One is the technology, silicon technology, which is the manufacturing related, right? The process nodes and stuff. The second one is an EDA, CAD development. And the third one is the application domains. You've got 5G, you've got automotive, you've got data center, and so on, right? And it's not only it's not only the manufacturing that is moving in-house. So we are also seeing some trends where even EDA is moving in-house because that provides some differentiation. So if you look at the recent acquisition by Siemens of Mentor Graphics, right? That is a very indicative that when it comes to automotive vehicle, CAD companies have certain differentiating values and in-houses, basically, right? They prefer to have something that will give them an edge in-house. So this is, as Mujtaba also said, I agree that it is sort of like a full circle. I remember 4 decades ago, system companies had their own in-house chip teams and chip teams that had own manufacturing and even EDA. Right? Then that model changed and they started outsourcing because now we were into 90 nanometer or below 65 nanometer and stuff. The differentiation was not so much. There was a price pressure, right? So consolidating manufacturing with, let's say, TSMCs or Global Foundries and others, that didn't provide any differentiation. So that got consolidated volume in manufacturing. But certain businesses like Intel, for example, right, or Maxim, they saw the differentiation in the process node and they did continue even at that time. For them, this is not a new thing. Their edge was in manufacturing and being able to be ahead in the process node, right? So this is kind of a full circle and it is literally coming because we are now going into the sub-micron. We're touching 3 nanometer. We may be going below. But I think, so this is where a company can really build an edge over what a mass manufacturer will provide that is consolidated, right? But once we cross over this trend and once we break through this barrier, I wouldn't be surprised if we go back to the older mode, where then the price point will drive consolidated manufacturing. But this phenomenon will be there for at least a decade. And and then we'll be, I think, back. But this is all EDA, it's all very cyclical, right? I mean, the industry itself is like that.
Excellent, Pradeep. So you actually gave me a good segue into my next question, right? So we were talking about EDA and especially during the recent pandemic, we've seen almost everything move to the cloud. And EDA again was one of the big things which, earlier you could never imagine such a heavy system being on cloud, but that's actually been actually happening. EDA and many other such systems are actually moving to cloud. I just wanted, we'll start with Srini, just your quick take on, what is the impact that, of all this movement to cloud is going to have on the chip manufacturing and the design industry. It's good, bad, you're going to take some time to digest, etc.
Actually, it is a good thing, and we see a lot of benefit in it, right? If you look at the technology migration, as Pradeep said, from 90 nanometer to the sub-micron technologies, now we're talking about 4 and 3 and 2, as Nirav also mentioned, right? The amount of design you're putting into these systems and the amount of tools, the complexity of the design, the amount of the tool, the complexity of the tools is significantly higher. As a result of it, the cost of the tools and also increasing. And now with the global, the design houses are global, the technology is spread around, operations are spread around globally. You need to have a mechanism to manage this EDA tools and the flows and the methodologies across the worldwide, right? We have design houses in India, we have designs in US and in Singapore and China and many other places. How do we manage it, right? What used to be like, have a localized EDA licenses and then run it operational is going to be very, very challenging. It's very, very not so cost effective. Certainly what we wanted to do is ability to do it through a cloud, right? If we can do it in a compute, storage and licensing, everything through a cloud, and also not just only the EDA part of it, but the methodologies, the flows, the change management on the design, so that you manage through this through a private cloud or a corporate cloud, what we call. And if we can do that one, it certainly improves the utilization of the license and hence be very, very cost effective in certainly in the areas of chip design houses. And that can be applied to manufacturing also, right? Because manufacturing also, they need quite a bit of once the design is delivered to a manufacturer, now they need to run a lot of tools and other stuff. And the amount of designs they have to run through to the factories is significantly higher than what it was. So certainly we see a value add in this cloud base, and certainly it's going to be here to stay.
Excellent, Srini. But Subhash, I wanted your take on this, but at the same time, there's a very interesting question from the audience that maybe I want you can comment on. We all spoke about, there's some movement in terms of, companies trying to use different locations outside of the traditional locations for design and manufacturing. And you kind of hinted on this while you were speaking. Are you seeing investments in different geographies for both design and manufacturing? And if yes, could you just elaborate on what are the newer hotspots that you're seeing?
Sure, maybe I can touch upon. I think different companies have different strategies and they may apply this slightly differently. But at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is that create acceptable solutions at affordable price points. It's as simple as that, right? We want an acceptable solution. There needs to be a market acceptability for that solution. And it needs to have a price point that people will afford. And the context may be slightly different in the sense that in the premium segment, that the context of the affordability may be different compared to another segment and so forth. But that's all we are trying to do. Now, this applies to design. This applies to manufacturing. I think when it comes to design, the availability of talent is a big part of it. The right talent so that we can create the acceptable solutions at the affordable point. And if we can do that, I think that's the best part of it. And when everything equal, when you have the capabilities, of course, the cost will be the most attractive piece of it and be for us to go and drive it. And in the manufacturing, it is a very, very similar story. There is also another aspect of it changing more than the geographical, which I want to touch upon, which is if you really look at some of the advanced factories in the fabs, and I can tell that one of the fabs that I had a preview within the company was fully automated. And there is so much of automation that goes in. It's not just about the cost alone. It is also about the precision, right? It's about the mistakes that's being avoided and things like that. And so it is definitely happening. A continuous assessment of what is the best way of doing, whether it is design or manufacturing. Location is one aspect of it, based on the availability of the talent, availability of the materials, and many of the things that will happen. And there is also another aspect of it, which is the best way of dealing with it. One is, of course, the regions. The other one is more of the automation. So there's a complex equation, but it kind of brings all the pieces together.
Interesting. Thank you, Subhash. I think that's very well taken, the question. Really good insights. Mushtaba, I'll come to you for almost the final segment that we wanted to touch upon. And you started, you did mention that, one of the things Microsoft is doing very well is collaborating with the ecosystem, not just semiconductors, but other areas as well. Now, specifically, collaborating with educational institutes and even system integrators and service providers, etc. And Microsoft is known to do that very well. So from a semiconductor perspective, Mushtaba, what is your take on, what are the areas that you look forward to in terms of collaborating with system integrators? Any areas that you think they have evolved or they need to evolve in terms of addressing some of the pain points that you would have?
Yeah, I can share, I'll group it into a few areas. So let's start with the EDA industry. I think that was touched on earlier. So from a cloud standpoint, we've been working with all the major EDA partners and really looking at how can we rethink the complex semi-design flow. Like Srini mentioned, chips are pushing past 10 billion transistors and gonna head much farther north. So how can we scale drastically in cloud? So I think rethinking how do you do floor planning or timing analysis, and could it be broken up into a few large scaled out runs with analysis and shrink the design time. So we've been kind of looking at that. On top of that, then looking at applicability of AI and machine learning to kind of help the designer on choosing the recipes for floor planning, etc. And how can you accelerate that? Also, third, I think the global nature of the design houses was mentioned. Azure has more than 60 global regions, several in India, Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, Korea. All the hubs is close to an Azure region. So we're looking at how could we enable more secure collaboration. So instead of the industry needing design chambers set up between an EDA player, Qualcomm, and TSMC, can we help set that up virtually in the cloud in a secure way? And so that also speeds up efficiency. So we're really looking at the entire tool flow and design flow. So that's one. Last year, we started working with the US government, Department of Defense, and the industry on how do you start securing the silicon design and manufacturing flow. That's a big topic, at least in the US. And we've publicly talked about that. So I won't kind of go into a lot of details here, but securing security and integrity of semiconductors is paramount, right? Like we talked about everything's running on semiconductors. So to be able to say that, what was produced was exactly what was designed, nothing more, nothing less, at scale, that is important. And downstream, we're also working with the supply chain industry. We've using our tools for data sharing, blockchain, looking at provenance from cradle to grave of the chips. That's super important for us as a cloud provider. We are hosting some of the most important data sets across government, healthcare, finance, other industries. So making sure we can trace the integrity and supply chain of the RAM, SSDs, all the parts that are coming, the network parts that are coming into our data center. So that's important. So I'm kind of looking at it across that spectrum. I didn't cover the OEMs as much, but I think I've given enough of a lens. So I'll stop here in the interest of time.
Yeah. Thank you, Mushtaba. And Pradeep, I am very reluctant to skip you, although there is very little time. Any quick take on where you see, because you have this diverse experience, US, India, multiple companies. Where do you see the key role of system integrators? How is it evolving? Some quick take will be really good to hear.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I think I'll keep it short. I think India is really poised for a great leap forward. I think ball is in our court. If we can really run with it, I think the next decade will be India for system integration. And I'll just give you an evidence here for this narrative. The global companies are innovating and selling products for the Europe and North Americas. There are many pain points in India. Even if you think about autonomous vehicle, it's not going to run in India. We will have to innovate on top to make sure that it can run in India. Right. So you look at many areas. I think the pain points that Indian consumer has at a price point that Indian consumer thinks is worth it. Right. global companies are not focusing there. There's a huge space. There's a huge opportunity. I think it's time for India to step forward from being chip design software to being a system solution provider, architect and an integrator.
Excellent. Thank you, Pradeep. Nirav, I will let you have the final say because you're one of the leading system integrators. Your take on where it is headed.
So I kind of echo what Pradeep just said. I do see that happening across the customer base. We are collaborating with some of our partners to develop reference designs to help them build the end-to-end solutions. We are developing digital twin strategies for them to augment the shift left strategy and produce more. We have been developing end-to-end use cases as well for the functionalities which we spoke about. Again, that helps to free up resources and go and win more business. So I believe all this as a system integrator will help us to deliver more use cases than what we could do in a traditional model. We're also working very closely with academic institution to create course content and talent, because at the end of it, whatever we do, we will need a lot more people as well. So that's what we are doing as well, to create the talent pool to cater to the growth of this industry. So those are the some of the aspects which we are working as to augment this industry.
Great. Thank you so much, Nirav. We're just a little over time and I could have just gone on and on. This is such an interesting topic and such great panelists. And thank you all for the great insights and your practical hands-on experience that you shared with the audience here. Jamila, back to you to help us close this very exciting discussion today.